Hi everyone, John Pokerchip Friedberg here with another episode of Stacking Chips, your strategy source for the 2007 World Series of Poker, the Bellagio Cup, and the dozens of other events going on right here in lovely Las Vegas. So I heard a couple of funny things yesterday. Somebody sent me over an email last night about with a link to some forums talking about how Card Player was copying another site for interviewing Vinny Vin's chair. And of course they're referring to my interview with Vinny Vin's chair, which I did, I don't know, a couple of Saturdays ago. And I thought it was funny because for a couple of reasons. First of all, Card Player was being accused of copying this other site. Now, let me first, I just want to put the disclosure out there that Card Player has nothing to do with my show, other than the fact that my show airs on cardplayer.com. And also, of course, they pay me to do the show. But as far as the content, the guests, the interviews, the questions, the theories, the strategy, everything, that's all my decision. So Card Player has nothing to do with that. I'm here for the World Series this year. I live here in town. I'm doing a video every day. I played this year in about 25 World Series events. My days have been hectic. The last thing I've been doing is going through and reading the forums and watching all the poker update and the contents and everything. I have my guests on, I do my show, I go and get my sandwich, and I go to the Rio and I play an event. Okay, so first of all, I had no idea that any other site had a previous interview of Vinny Vin's chair. That was completely not to my knowledge. But here's why I did that interview. The second event that Vinny did not show up at was the $2,500 short-handed event. It was a six-handed event. And if any of the people that recall this event, day one ended with about 42 players. Vinny Vin was one of those players. Guess who was another one of those players? John Friedberg was also one of those players. If anybody followed the coverage of that event, it was actually pretty humorous. Towards the end of day one, Vinny was being very loud and obnoxious, and I actually walked over to Vinny. I completely lost my temper. I was just fed up with hearing him scream. He was at the table right behind me. So I walk over to Vinny's table and I start yelling at him. I say, Vinny, you gotta shut the F up, man. You're being loud, you're being obnoxious, and you're being really distractive. And, you know, I played with you a million times and you're always, you know, not necessarily quiet, but you're never this out of line. So I asked him to, you know, please be quiet. The floorman came over and said, whoa, we got this taken care of. Anyway, then the poker news reporters actually wrote that up on, you know, whatever site was covering the event. I know I saw it on Card Player how John Friedberg walked over and, you know, told Vinny to be quiet. Anyway, the second day of the event, which is when Vinny didn't show up, he started towards the top in chip counts. I started at the very bottom of chip counts, and I ended up finishing about 24th place, 24th or 26th, I forget, and I think Vinny finished around 20th. Now, that entire day two, I lasted probably 4 or 5 hours into day two, and the whole time people were going over to Vinny's chair and talking to Vinny, right? Or talking to Vinny's chair. I was, other people were, and so the idea originally was formed at the tournament. I was there. So certainly this is completely blown up. There was no copying. There was no knowledge about a previous video. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it was such a clever idea to where anyone should have sort of the intellectual rights to this sort of thing. I mean, Vinny didn't show up. I mean, he allegedly has a serious drug problem, and you know that's really what this is all about. And I don't think anyone should try to take credit for the creativity behind interviewing a chair when the whole day at the tournament, myself and the other 41 or 40 players that were there were doing the same thing to Vinny's chair. So again, I did it. I thought it was funny, and you know, again, this whole thing was a little blown up. So we're putting all that behind us. And if you have any questions, look up the news coverage and look at the names in the tournaments. And I can't say I'm embarrassed that Vinny outlasted me when he wasn't in the show, wasn't even in the tournament, because he had a lot of chips and I didn't have any. I was fortunate to have finished as close to Vinny as I did. Anyway, so I have an interesting guest on the show today. He has been one of the original sponsored online players. In fact, I consider myself a dinosaur in the online poker world, and this guy was playing before I was. And I remember I used to always come across his name, always wondered who he was. And anyway, he has since He's done quite well online for the last few years. He's a Canadian player. He's also had some success. He's made a few televised tables in the World Poker Tour, and I think also a World Series Circuit event. And let's have him on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Worth, who plays under the online name Krazy Kanuck. Jim, thanks for coming on the show, man.
My pleasure.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
So I remember I started playing online poker like 4 years ago.
Right.
And at the time, I think the most well-known online player back then was you. You've been around for, at least the one name I kept hearing all the time was Krazy Kanuck, Krazy Kanuck, Krazy Kanuck. And you've been around forever. And yeah, tell us about your background. How did you get started online, and when was it?
Well, I had actually played live since about 1992 and had discovered online poker in about 1999 in Calgary. I'd walked into a client's business, and he was sitting down playing poker on his computer, and I actually thought it was like a Hoyle's poker game. And he goes, no, it's online, it's interactive. I said, well, that's cool. It's too bad you can't bet money. He goes, no, this is real money. I said, you're kidding me, right? So I think I blew off the rest of my day, went home, downloaded, and started to play almost immediately from there, yeah.
And that was, when did you say that was?
I think that was late 1999.
Oh, wow, that was a very long time ago. That was before most of these big sites came to the marketplace. So you have since, you play for Team Ultimate Bet.
Right.
And I think you were telling me that you actually received an endorsement from Ultimate Bet before Moneymaker even signed with PokerStars.
Yeah, around the series of 2003, I had actually been asked to start to do some speaking work with Ultimate Bet, etc. And they officially picked me up early 2004, but I was doing some endorsement work for them in around May, June of 2003, so it was interesting.
Wow, that's a long time ago. And
yeah,
you're still on the team, so.
I'm still on the team.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. In my opinion, I've been playing now for, I don't know, between 3 and 4 years, but of course, you know, initially I'd play very recreationally. I didn't trust playing online, etc. Now, of course, I do.
Right.
I've seen the landscape of poker change so much in the time that I've been playing.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear your perspective on that. Do you feel like the style of play has changed much over time? And what do you do to sort of compensate for that to always keep an edge?
Well, what's interesting is I actually remember the series in 2003 and listening to the older time players, older time pros, that what they were doing was bitching about the online maniacs, you know, and there'd be maybe one at a table or one out of every 3 tables that the people would sit at, they'd have this online maniac, whether it's from Europe or, you know, North America, whatever. And they used to talk about how aggressive they were and reckless and whatever. But what's happened in the last 4 years is that now you're playing in huge field events where people, the education level of the players is way up dramatically. There's so many places of knowledge to pull from, and they can play so many hands online that now you're getting a lot more aggressive style out there, and I think the variance has gone up in these bigger fields and tournaments because of it. Now, as for keeping an edge on it, I started writing articles after 2003, and I was saying that probably the best place to play these big field events to get practice was online, and there wasn't any other place you could really do it except for once a year at the World Series. So I try to play as many big events as I can online, but I also try to hone my games a lot in sit and goes, etc., just to keep an edge, like to recognize who's playing aggressively, who's not, and adjusting my game accordingly. I mean, if I'm at a table with, I mean, you can sit at a table now with 9 people that you don't know, and basically there could be 8 full-time online pros there that are as good as pretty much anybody in the, you know, out there in the field. So you got to be able to recognize the styles quick and adjust to them, and you have to adjust to them to be able to be successful.
Yeah, in poker it used to be when you didn't recognize a player at a table, that was a great thing.
Right.
Now it's a very scary thing.
Right. You'd be doing yourself a big disservice if you underestimate the people sitting in front of you, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one thing I've noticed, I know when I first started playing online, I played very tight. I played very conservative poker. I would wait for aces and pairs and ace-king and big hands like that.
Right.
And I would still do very well. You know, you just sit back and you wait, and eventually you're going to get your chips in and trap your opponent, who's, you know, maybe you'll flop a set, he's going to call off a top pair or something, and or you can just, you know, open shove all in with aces, and pocket nines is going to call you.
Yeah.
But the styles have changed a lot. Like when people are playing that way, the strategy that works best at a tight table, the best strategy is to play loose,
right,
and vice versa. At a loose table, the best strategy is to play tight. So what I've seen happen is sort of the people that were playing tighter were winning the most initially, and then it sort of changed around to where the people that were playing the loosest were winning the most because they were outplaying the tighter players. And now it just seems like with all these new poker training videos and all these other instructional tools that everyone, I mean, first it was the Dan Harrington books where everyone started to make the squeeze plays, and if your M is 3, you're moving all in with any 2 cards and that sort of thing. Now it seems like it's more the video tools and the instructional tools that everyone is watching now. There's thousands and thousands of members that are signing up for these companies that are learning all of the same style of play. So now it just seems like everyone tends to sort of migrate towards the same style of play.
I totally agree, but people are realizing that in these events, the chips are the power, and you need to get a stack. And more people are realizing that you're going to need to take chances early to survive the blind levels as they go up, or else you're going to be in the typical rut that most players find themselves in playing tournaments. They keep on making it deep, end up bubbling because they get their first hand cracked because a big stack takes a shot at them with a random hand. And they have the luxury of doing that because they have the stack. So now it's all about accumulating chips, and you have to adjust your style accordingly to be able to work with what's in front of you to be able to amass those chips. And if you don't, you're taking yourself out of contention of each tournament you're playing at.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So let's talk about something else. You and I had a funny conversation the other night. We were out having dinner or something. I forget where we were. But so we were out and we had a conversation about televised poker.
Right.
And you and I have both played at TV tables. I had a World Series table. I think you've had a couple of tables.
World Series WPT.
Right. So
recently WPT.
So we both had incidents where the announcers of the show were saying negative things about us.
Right.
For me, I was sort of like, I've been a very successful online player for a while, but I was new to the World Series. Well, not necessarily new, but new to being in a final table of a World Series. And so, of course, the way TV works, they have to make it entertaining. They have to make it sort of hero and villain. And at my table, the 2 heroes were John Fan and Humberto Brenes. Everyone else was villain. So, of course, they couldn't, it was very hard for them to say anything positive about the way I played it. Everything, was luck, and, the hands that they chose, they didn't choose to show the hands where I ridiculously outplayed John Fan and bluffed him off of key pots. They just showed the ones where, every hand was all in and, you get lucky. So you and I were laughing about that. You've also had some experience on the WPT where the commentators were giving you some crap for your play.
Oh, they definitely built a fool's image, but that's quite okay. I mean, the hands that they chose to show were hands where it would either look like I was outplayed or I laid down a better hand than what my opponent has. I mean, they don't show where I went from 800,000 in chips up to 1.9 in second place at the final table. They don't say how they get there because that doesn't support their argument. I did commentary for the Canadian Poker Tour for a year and a half, and the producers wanted us to spice it up by, picking a character at the table and going after him a little bit. Well, I guess I was that guy that they went after, and that's okay. I've had a number of people recognize me from the show at the series, and it's worked to my benefit in some regards too, because I'm getting more people playing back at me thinking I'm going to lay down, and that's quite okay too.
Well, they made me look like a complete maniac, which I'm not, and that's worked to my advantage. So people are, I'm finding that they're absolutely scared to death of me because they saw me on TV just making these huge shoves, and of course getting there.
You can play off that, and both of us know we've made it deep in a number of tournaments since then, and we're both making money at the game, and it really doesn't matter about what the perception is out there. We know how we play, and we learn from the mistakes, and just if people want to play back at us because of a certain image that they think they see from TV, so be it. That's great.
And it's great for the game because when the producers choose to show the hands that either have all in or all these crazy hands, the broad population that's watching poker and actually using that as their primary source of learning the game, they come into the tables and they just start shoving with any 2 cards because that's all they see on TV. They see people on TV that only have 5 big blinds and it's folded to them on the button, so they shove all in with six deuce four-handed.
Right.
And so the people that are watching this at home, they don't realize they'll come and play a tournament, a full ring 10-handed table early in the tournament, and they'll shove in with the 6 deuce because they saw some guy on TV do it, and they don't understand why the situation is different. So it is great for the game. It was a little bit frustrating at first when I first watched my episode. I'm sure you felt the same, but since then it's worked out to our benefit.
Absolutely.
Both in the near term and the long term.
Absolutely.
So last thing, the World Series, the main event. You start on Monday. What's your strategy?
4 years ago, I started with like a small pot strategy up front, and I realized in the last couple of years that you still need to amass chips, and you got to take risks. But what I've experienced so far at this year's World Series, I found the aggression level has gone up very dramatically over previous years. So I'm actually thinking about sitting back a little. In the first couple of rounds, I'm gonna mix it up. I always do, because I'm trying to set up an image that I want people very unsure of what I'm gonna play. But I plan on buckling it down a little bit from there and playing a little bit more trap poker in the first day, and letting basically the landmines at the table try to bluff into me or take pots away, and hopefully my hand stands up if I have the better hand. So that's my goal in day one. Is I want to amass chips, but I'm going to try to play a little bit more survival poker day one, and then turn on the jets on day two when the blinds mean something.
Have you made it deep in the main event yet?
3 years ago, I made it deep into day two, and the rest of the time, last year, for example, I was out before the dinner break, and I actually had 18 pocket pairs between queens and aces before the dinner break, and I never got above 13,000. So I kept, getting a big hand, chipping out, getting cracked, and it was a comedy at that table. But the World Series has not been the main event of the World Series in the last 4 years. Hasn't been my best event, so I'm hoping that hopefully you get a better result this year.
Well, I've played the main event for the last 3 years. All 3 years we started with 10,000 in chips.
Right.
I have yet to cross the 12,000 chip mark. I made day two in 04 and lasted about 3 hours into day two. Did not make the money.
Right.
And was out, I think, maybe either before or shortly after the dinner break the last 2 years. So
right.
I guess we're both due for a big year this year.
Let's do it.
So let's hope we do it.
All right.
All right. Well, that's it for today's episode of Stacking Chips. Make sure to tune in for the rest of the World Series for more strategy talk, discussion, interviews, and more right here on Card Player TV. And keep those emails coming in to stackingchips@cardplayer.com. From John Poker Trip Friedberg
and Jim Krazy Kanuck Worth,
we're out of here. Good luck, and I will see you guys tomorrow.